can add to it.
Jake, hi, morning. That's actually what I was getting to. In terms of a price climax, do you think we've reached it? Do you think this is about it in terms of where the market may have found a base? Because there's been a reset both in terms of the range of the market and the way sentiment has got hit by the time the series is done. Would you say this is about it in price damage?
It would be difficult to say that. I'll give the reason why. Because world over, especially in Europe, a bunch of ETFs are shutting down. There are a whole bunch of things which are completely outside our control and unknown to us in a sense, where people are in a sense shutting up shop or closing their exposures to different parts of the world. So when the lifeline of liquidity gets chopped so brutally, positions are just getting closed out. I mean, for instance, all arbitragers for the better part of this year have been making the equivalent of a 7%, 8% per annum kind of return on positions that they were funding in the futures and options markets, which is the true arbitrager where he shorts the futures and buys the cash, and that 7-8% return, that is annualized for the year, was kind of taken away quite brutally in 1 month, where the currency depreciated, close to 10%, and therefore I know of situations where books have actually just been closed in this month, and that particular lifeline of liquidity has been knocked off, which is over a period of time will get replaced by others, or when the currency stabilizes, that money could come back. So if you add to this kind of forced liquidation of arbitrage positions, I think you're talking about a pretty aggressive set of circumstances that have descended. So in this context, to say that the markets have peaked out or climaxed out or bottomed out in terms of price terms, I think it will be a bold, almost foolish kind of thing. But I would say that from a level perspective, there are mid-caps that are available virtually at bankruptcy valuations. Frontliners are priced almost as if, concepts like book value make no sense. So in that context, I think the locals will need to be, and they probably have been, if you see the numbers, pretty aggressive buyers over the last few days. And if LIC, which has been the biggest daddy of them all, is the ultimate test of a contrarian investor. I mean, and he's been pretty quiet right through, but I think I've been quite aggressive in the last few weeks. My own take is that I don't think there are too many channels that talk about the investing prowess, if you will, of LIC, but I'd actually go out and say that for having seen this institution over 20-25 years, I can tell you that they're the biggest contrarian investors, and I think they probably are the biggest buyers in the market today, and have the liquidity and the wherewithal to be the counterbalance to this kind of international global panic and downturn, especially focused on India. I mean, of course, the last leg of the downturn was exacerbated and brought upon us by the government themselves, and maybe they need to act, because in some senses they've been their own worst enemies. So I think if you take some contrarian investing into account at this point in time, maybe the fall can be, but who's to say the index can't go to 4,400? I mean, I wouldn't hazard that guess, depending on how acute the problem of liquidity and so on and so forth is as far as international markets and international players is concerned. But by the same token, and there are players who certify this, if you will, that there is money waiting to invest. I think they needed policy action. Maybe we are at the first steps. I say this with guarded caution, because one policy does not a flurry of them make, and maybe a whole host of them will follow. But I think money should come in, and December should be, to my mind, a substantially better month, notwithstanding what the first few signs on the ticker tape tell you as the series begins.
Jakes, before we carry on about the market, just your thoughts on airlines, because there's been a lot of focus on Kingfisher, etc. Would you buy any of those bombed out stocks?
Since the sort of mood on the day from the channel, I could gather, was wordplays. I think airlines is nothing but a pie in the sky, in a sense. So I would, I think that kind of addresses. I mean, we need substantially lower taxes, etc. On some of the procurement, and no international airlines in any case, if that's the backdrop, has ever made, has ever seen sustainable profits across the board. I mean, barring a few worldwide. So I don't think it's any different in India. My own sense, however, is that while some airlines are good, but I think the approach towards pricing some of their inputs in terms of taxes, etc., needs to be looked at. The government is acting. they've called for meetings, and I think in some sense these baby steps, as somebody called out and told me this morning, they will turn out to be a gentle trot. I think that's what I'm hopeful of. So it's not so much as to what they're doing in particular spaces, but the fact that they're taking steps, that's reassuring. And very clearly they've also mentioned that there's nothing specific going to happen in terms of an individual company bailout, which is heartening. Not that we needed to hear it, that the government is going to step into individual companies, but the fact that they're worried about this space, I think is important. The fact they're acting is even more so.
Along with the cut we've seen on weaker spaces, Jakes, there's also been a reset on some of those heroes like VIP, Titan, Jubilant Foodworks. A, warranted, and B, here to stay. You think that these stocks will probably be headed lower than higher?
Well, some of these were, had become places of safety, if you will, in the markets over the last 6-9 months, where people kind of flocked into these simply because they were consumption themes and they offered relative safety in terms of the Indian consuming public being the active. So whether the Indian retail was presence in the markets was not as critical as the fact that the Indian retail was present in terms of consuming some of the commodities or some of the products that these companies were dishing out. So in that context, they became safe havens for the marketplace. But once the crack started in the market, I think inevitably some of the high PE names become also the first names where you've made money and therefore you want to bail out. So if there's been a derating, I think it's been in line with the markets. If you clearly see even the fine print, I mean the media carrying stories about all sorts of collateral stuff not connected with the markets, promoters holdings being busted in various companies. All of this essentially adds to the selling climax, if you will. And in that context, the consumption themes do take a hit. But were they to stabilize, they come off, by a few notches on the PE scale. Inevitably, I think buying will return into this, because I think what's not changed in India for sure is that with a whole bunch of schemes like the Narega, etc., the consuming base or the consumption-oriented population has become far more than the numbers that we could see, let's say, 5 years ago. And there's a lot more people at the grassroots level who are consuming today. And I think that is the big story, which is why the demand pull from strata of the society, the length and breadth of the strata has been a lot higher to bring down product prices. And I think while inflation therefore is a continuing theme, and maybe people talk about it, but I think we can't take away the fact that the consumption theme has been a lot to do with the Indian retail consumption. I mean, I do wish, since the talk is on retail today in some sense, again a wordplay, I think the same retail needs to look at the stock market now, because in times like this, if interest rates are close to peaking out, my own sense is it's only a matter of time before serious interest returns into the stock markets as a whole. And the Indian retail population in a sense has been strangely missing in action, and for good reason. I mean, they've missed out the carnage, as it were, and I think there's a good time to come in and pick up the crumbs, as a lot of international investors under significant pressure for a variety of reasons are coming and dumping stocks in the Indian market.
Okay, Jakes, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining in today. That's one view on the market.